The Shadowed Veil, Part 2. Chapter 10, The Stirring of Fate. The fire in the seer's cave flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows on the stone walls as Moira struggled to steady her breathing. The echoes of her vision still thrummed through her bones, the name Ciaran lingering on her lips like an incantation she had long forgotten. Dane watched her carefully, his arms crossed. "What did you see?" Moira hesitated. "A name," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "Ciaran." The seer's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "The name of a king," she said. "And not just any king, your king." Moira's chest tightened. "I don't understand," she whispered, frustration creeping into her tone. "Who is he to me?" The seer dipped her fingers back into the bowl of black water, swirling its depths. "Your past was stolen from you," she said. "But fate does not let go so easily. It will find its way back to you, one way or another." Moira clenched her fists. The feeling inside her, this strange pull toward something, toward someone, was becoming unbearable. It was as if a piece of her had been ripped away, and she was only now beginning to sense its absence. She turned sharply toward Dane. "You knew," she accused. "You knew who I was." Dane didn't deny it. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his gaze unwavering. "I suspected," he admitted. "I wasn't sure until now." Rage and confusion warred within her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would you have believed me?" he countered. "Would you have understood?" Moira swallowed hard. "Maybe not." But that didn't change the burning need for answers clawing at her insides. The seer spoke again. "The threads of fate have already begun to weave once more. Your time in the mortal realm is ending, Moira." Moira's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" The seer's gaze grew distant. "He is coming for you." Beyond the veil, in the Unseelie Court, Ciaran stood at the head of his war party, the storm of his rage barely contained. The night air was thick with magic, the scent of iron and frost filling his lungs. His warriors, clad in dark armor, awaited his command. They knew what this mission meant. Ronan approached, his expression grim. "The court will not take this lightly, my king." Ciaran's golden eyes burned like twin suns in the dark. "Let them try to stop me." He turned toward the veil, the shifting barrier between worlds shimmering with otherworldly energy. He could feel her on the other side. She was out there. She was waiting. And gods help anyone who tried to keep him from her. He lifted his hand, his magic crackling in the air like lightning. The veil shuddered, resisting him, but he poured his power into it, forcing the boundary to bend to his will. With a final burst of energy, the barrier cracked. The mortal realm lay before him and he stepped through. Moira felt it before she saw it, a ripple of power so strong it sent a tremor through the earth. She gasped, turning toward the cave's entrance. The wind howled, the trees outside bending as if bowing to an unseen force. Dane cursed under his breath. "Damn it." The seer merely smiled. "It seems fate does not believe in patience." Then, the sky tore open. A rift of darkness split the air just beyond the treeline, shadows curling at its edges, and from its depths stepped a figure wrapped in night and fury. Moira's breath caught. Golden eyes. Familiar and achingly beautiful. A name whispered in the back of her mind, slipping through her grasp like smoke. She knew him. She knew him. Ciaran's gaze locked onto her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world around them ceased to exist. Then he took a step forward, his voice low, raw, and filled with something dangerous. "Moira." And just like that everything came undone. Chapter 11, The Breaking of the Spell. Time stopped. The forest was silent, save for the low hum of power in the air, an ancient magic vibrating through the trees, through the ground, through the very breath Moira took. She stared at Ciaran, his golden eyes burning like twin stars, his figure wrapped in the tendrils of shadow and light that still clung to him from his passage through the veil. Her heart thundered in her chest. Something inside her stirred, shifted, awakened. But she didn't move. Didn't speak. She should have felt fear. A powerful being had torn through the boundary between worlds, appearing before her with the force of a storm. But all she felt was a longing so deep it nearly brought her to her knees. Ciaran took another step forward, his gaze locked onto hers, intense and unreadable. The air between them crackled, a tether snapping into place, something invisible, but undeniable. "Moira," he murmured, his voice hoarse, raw, desperate. A sharp pain lanced through her skull. Images flickered behind her eyes, his hand in hers, whispered vows in the dark, a kingdom bathed in twilight, lips meeting in stolen moments of defiance. She gasped, stumbling back. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I don't." She didn't know him. And yet, she did. Dane moved in front of her in an instant, his dagger gleaming in the firelight. "Stay back." Ciaran's gaze flicked to Dane, his expression turning to steel. Shadows coiled around him, the weight of his magic pressing against the air like a brewing storm. "Move aside." Dane tightened his grip on his dagger. "She doesn't remember you." The word struck Ciaran like a blow. His breath hitched, his eyes flickering with something dangerous and devastating all at once. Moira swallowed hard, stepping around Dane, her fingers trembling. "Who are you?" she whispered. Ciaran exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "You know who I am." A shiver ran down her spine. He spoke with such certainty, as if the very foundations of the world would crumble before he accepted otherwise. She shook her head. "I don't." He took another step toward her, the space between them growing smaller, suffocating. His gaze softened, something vulnerable flickering beneath the fire of his fury. "You knew me," he said. "You loved me." Moira flinched. "Loved?" Her stomach twisted. "That's not possible." Dane scoffed. "Even if she did, that was before she was cast out of your world. Your people did this to her." Ciaran's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You think I don't know that?" His voice was laced with fury, but beneath it was something else, something close to despair. The seer stepped forward then, watching the scene unfold with keen, knowing eyes. "She has not been entirely erased," she said, tilting her head. "The memory remains, locked away. But the heart remembers what the mind forgets." Ciaran's gaze snapped to Moira. "Let me prove it to you." Moira took another step back, her pulse pounding. She had spent weeks trying to understand who she was, what had been taken from her. And now, here stood a man who claimed to have all the answers. But she wasn't sure if she wanted them. I need time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ciaran's expression darkened, but he nodded. "Then I will give it to you." He exhaled, as if it pained him to do so. "But I am not leaving you again." Dane tensed. "That's not your choice to make." Ciaran's eyes flickered with the hint of a smirk. "It never was." Moira pressed a hand to her temple, frustration and confusion clashing within her. She needed space. She needed clarity. But as she turned her gaze back to Ciaran, she knew one thing for certain. The spell that had erased her past was beginning to break. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 12, A Heart Divided. The fire between them burned low, the embers casting eerie shadows that danced across Moira's pale face. The silence stretched as thick as the tension crackling in the air, charged with magic, with longing, with fear. Moira clenched her hands, her pulse erratic. The name Ciaran ripped through her soul, unraveling something inside her she couldn't yet comprehend. She wanted to run. She wanted to stay. "I don't know you," she whispered, though the words felt like a lie. "I don't know anything." Ciaran's jaw tightened, but his voice was careful, controlled. "That's not true." He took a slow step forward. "You may not remember me, but your soul does. I can feel it." She flinched, a sharp pain lancing through her temple. More flashes of memory flickered at the edge of her mind, his hand against her cheek, lips brushing her forehead, a kingdom of shadows and stars where she had once belonged. She pressed a hand to her chest. Why did it hurt so much? Dane moved closer to her, a protective force against the power that Ciaran radiated. "She doesn't need to remember," he said coldly. "You need to leave." Ciaran's golden eyes flicked to him, sharp as a blade. "And who are you to speak for her?" Dane's grip on his dagger tightened. "Someone who actually gives her a choice." A storm whirled to life in Ciaran's gaze. Shadows stirred at his feet, the weight of his fury barely contained. "You think I took her choices?" His voice was deceptively quiet, but Moira could feel the power lurking beneath it, a beast barely restrained. Dane met his gaze without flinching. "You Fae took everything from her. Her memories. Her life. And now you've come to do what? Drag her back into your world like she's some lost artifact?" Moira sucked in a breath as Ciaran's expression darkened. But when he turned his gaze back to her, the anger melted, replaced by something far more dangerous. Desperation. "I came because I love you," he said, his voice raw. "Because I will burn down everything to bring you home." Her breath caught, her pulse roaring in her ears. A shiver ran through her, an instinctual reaction to the truth buried beneath his words. She felt it. Even if she couldn't remember, she felt it. "I don't know if I can go back," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I don't even know who I am." Ciaran stepped closer, so close that she could feel the warmth of his magic wrapping around her like a ghostly embrace. "Then let me show you." The seer, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. "You stand on a precipice, child." She looked at Moira with piercing violet eyes. "If you take this path, there is no turning back." Moira swallowed hard, her throat tight. She looked between Ciaran and Dane, both men standing like two halves of a world she no longer understood. If she left with Ciaran, she would have to face the truth. If she stayed, she could remain in the safety of ignorance. But was it truly safety, when every part of her ached for something more? Her gaze flicked to Ciaran once more, to the man who had crossed realms for her, who had defied his own court to find her. Her heart knew the answer, even if her mind refused to accept it. She took a slow, shuddering breath. "Then show me." Ciaran's eyes flashed with something dangerous and victorious. Dane cursed under his breath, but he said nothing. And as the storm of fate gathered around them, Moira knew, this was only the beginning. Chapter 13, The Path of Shadows. The decision had been made. But the weight of it pressed heavily upon Moira's chest as she followed Ciaran through the dense woods, the ancient magic of the veil still humming in the air. Every step forward was a step closer to the truth, one she was no longer sure she was ready to face. Dane lingered behind, silent, his expression unreadable. His presence was a shadow at her back, a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. She had trusted him when she had nothing else to hold on to. And now she was choosing to walk away. The trees thinned as they reached the edge of the wildlands, where the ground sloped into a deep valley, the ruins of an ancient Fae crossing lying in crumbled remains. Once, this place had been a gateway between realms, a passage between the mortal world and the Unseelie Court. Now, it was little more than a memory. Ciaran turned to face her, his golden eyes searching hers. The moment we step through, you will feel the pull of your magic. Your body will remember what was taken from you. Moira inhaled sharply. She wanted that. She feared that. Dane exhaled behind her. You don't have to do this. She turned to him, seeing the quiet resolve in his face. He had been there for her, helping her survive, helping her piece together the fragments of a life stolen from her. And yet, in her heart, she knew this was a journey she had to take. I do, she said softly. I need to know who I am. Dane's jaw tightened, but he gave a small nod. He understood. He had always understood. Ciaran lifted a hand, the shadows around them twisting, stretching, coiling into a shape unnatural to the mortal eye. The air rippled, the magic of the veil bending to his will. A portal began to form, shimmering with a dark light, pulsing with power Moira felt in her very bones. Her pulse quickened. The first step back into the realm of the Fae would change everything. She turned to Dane once more. Come with us. His eyes widened slightly, but he gave a sad smile. My place is here, Moira. He hesitated before adding, if you ever need me, you know where to find me. A lump formed in her throat, but she nodded. She wouldn't say goodbye, not forever. Then, with a final breath, she turned to Ciaran. He held out his hand. Are you ready? She wasn't. But she took his hand anyway. The portal rushed toward her, engulfing her in shadow and light, pulling her into the unknown. The moment her feet touched the ground on the other side, the world shifted. Power surged through her veins, a force so intense she staggered, gasping. It was like breathing for the first time, like waking from a dream that had lasted a lifetime. Every nerve in her body burned with magic, pulsing, humming, familiar. She collapsed to her knees, hands clawing at the grass beneath her. Flashes of memory surged through her mind. A throne room bathed in silver light. A whispered promise beneath the stars. A battle in the dead of night. Ciaran's voice, calling her name. Her breath came in short gasps as her head snapped up, eyes wide, glowing with the magic that had been locked away for so long. Ciaran knelt before her, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. It's coming back, isn't it? She met his gaze, her pulse hammering. Yes. And with it, the truth she had spent so long trying to uncover. She wasn't just a mortal woman. She was Fae. She was his queen. And she had been betrayed. Chapter 14, The Court of Thorns. The moment Moira stepped through the veil and into the Unseelie realm, the air around her crackled with magic. The sky was veiled in a perpetual twilight, the air thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers and something darker, something old, something watching. She gasped as another wave of power rushed through her veins, memories flickering in bursts of shattered light. The Unseelie Court. The corridors of Ravenglen Keep. The whispers of unseen forces, the sharp laughter of courtiers in the dark. She staggered, her knees threatening to buckle. Ciaran caught her before she could fall. His grip was strong, grounding. It's overwhelming, I know, he said softly. But it will settle. Moira looked up at him, her chest tight. This place, her voice wavered. I know it. Ciaran's golden eyes softened. You should. You were its queen. As they stood in the entrance of the Unseelie lands, movement stirred in the shadows. Figures began to emerge from the darkness, guards, nobles, and courtiers, their expressions ranging from shock to suspicion, to something close to fear. A woman stepped forward, draped in robes of silver and black. Lady Lysara. Moira's breath hitched as a sharp, visceral memory clawed to the surface. Lysara, standing beside Ciaran's throne, her voice a blade dipped in honey. You are not fit to rule beside him. Lysara's icy gaze flickered between Moira and Ciaran. Then, a slow, calculated smile curved her lips. What a surprise, she mused. The lost queen has returned from the dead. Ciaran's expression darkened. You will show her respect. Lysara tilted her head. Respect? For a queen who was cast from the veil? Who was erased by the will of the court? She let out a breathy chuckle. Or did you think we would all simply welcome her back as if nothing had happened? Moira swallowed hard, fighting through the tangled mess of her resurfacing memories. You were there. Lysara's gaze snapped to hers. Oh, my dear, I was more than just there. A sharp pain bloomed behind Moira's eyes, another memory forcing its way into focus. A chamber lit only by candlelight, voices whispering, a hand pressed against her back, a spell muttered under breath, and then, darkness. Her heart pounded. She was part of it. Lysara had been part of the betrayal. Ciaran must have seen the shift in her expression because his grip on her tightened. She was deceived, he said, his voice low and edged with barely restrained fury. She was stolen from this kingdom. And now she is back. Lysara's smile sharpened. Then let the court decide if they still want her. The grand hall of Ravenglen Keep was filled with flickering shadows and watchful eyes. The throne room had not changed, the walls still gleamed with black marble, the chandeliers dripped with enchanted silver. But the weight of the room had shifted. Moira stood beside Ciaran, her hands trembling at her sides as the court gathered before them. She had stood here before. She had ruled here before. But now, she was an outsider in her own kingdom. Lord Vareth stepped forward, his long black robes sweeping the floor. This is a delicate matter, my king. His voice was smooth, yet filled with hidden daggers. A queen once exiled cannot simply return as if nothing has changed. Ciaran's golden eyes flashed. She was taken against her will. She was meant to be my queen. Varetha's gaze slid to Moira. And yet, she remembers nothing of her rule. He smiled, slow and cruel. That is, if she ever truly ruled at all. A murmur ran through the nobles. Moira's fists clenched at her sides. I was your queen, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. You took my memories, but you did not take my soul. This place, this court, it is in my blood. A silence settled over the room, then, Lysara stepped forward. Then prove it. Moira swallowed hard. What? Lysara's smile was razor-sharp. If you are truly the queen you claim to be, then reclaim your place by trial. Another murmur rippled through the crowd. Vareth nodded approvingly. The trial of thorns. Moira's stomach twisted. She didn't remember the trial. She didn't know what it entailed. But she could see the challenge in Lysara's eyes. They wanted her to fail. Ciaran tensed beside her. She is not required to prove herself. Lysara's gaze glinted with malice. Then perhaps the court should decide if they will follow a king who bends to weakness. A hush fell over the nobles. A challenge to Ciaran's authority. Moira took a steadying breath. She had come here for the truth. And she would not let them strip her of it again. I accept the trial, she said. Ciaran turned to her, alarm flashing in his gaze. Moira. She met his eyes, something ancient and unyielding rising in her chest. I have to do this. Varetha's smirk deepened. Then it is decided. Lysara stepped closer, her voice a whisper meant only for Moira. You may have returned, my dear, she murmured. But you won't survive long enough to take the throne. Moira held her gaze, unflinching. Then she turned to face the court, her destiny no longer stolen, but rising from the ashes. The trial of thorns awaited. Chapter 15, The Trial of Thorns. The Unseelie Court had always been a place of treachery and whispered threats, but tonight, it pulsed with something deeper: expectation, hunger, and the thrill of impending bloodshed. Moira stood in the shadow-drenched courtyard, at the center of a ring of watching eyes, her pulse an unsteady drumbeat in her chest. The Trial of Thorns was not just a test of strength, it was a test of will, magic, and survival. The rules were simple: survive the gauntlet, endure the pain, and prove her claim to the throne. Lysara's voice rang out like silk-laced steel. The lost queen wishes to return. She let the words hang in the air before she added with a smirk, "Let us see if she is worthy." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Ciaran stood at the edge of the courtyard, his jaw tight, his golden eyes locked on Moira. He hated this. Hated that she had to prove herself to the very people who had betrayed her. But he also knew there was no other way. If Moira failed, the court would never accept her. If she succeeded, she would be undeniable. A shadowed figure stepped forward from the edge of the courtyard, a priest of the old magic, clad in midnight robes woven with silver thorns. He held out a blade, the edge serrated like razor-sharp vines. "The first task," he intoned, "is the path of pain." A hush fell over the court as the ground trembled beneath Moira's feet. From the stone floor, blackened roots began to twist and coil, forming a narrow path lined with enchanted thorns, each one laced with a venom that could weaken even the strongest Fae. Moira inhaled sharply. The path led to a pedestal, where a dagger gleamed in the flickering torchlight. The test was clear: walk through the gauntlet, retrieve the blade, and return, without faltering. She clenched her fists. This was about more than just pain. This was about control. Endurance. Ciaran took a step forward, as if ready to stop it. Moira glanced at him, just once, and gave the smallest shake of her head. She had to do this. Then, without another moment's hesitation, she stepped forward. The first thorn bit into her skin, sharp as a dagger's edge, and she barely swallowed the cry that rose in her throat. The venom burned, like fire spreading beneath her flesh. The pain was instant, but she forced her body forward. Another step. Then another. The thorns sank deeper, lacing her skin with thin trails of silvered blood, her magic sparking in protest. Her vision blurred at the edges, her breath coming short and uneven. She could feel the eyes of the court upon her, waiting for her to fail. Lysara's smug expression was carved into the darkness, her amusement barely hidden. Moira gritted her teeth and kept walking. Her magic, still raw and untamed, pulsed beneath the surface. It was there, waiting, aching to be used. But this was a test of endurance, not power. She couldn't afford to lose control. She reached the pedestal. Her fingers curled around the dagger's hilt, its cool weight settling into her palm. The moment she lifted it, the path shuddered, the vines twisting, pulling, trying to ensnare her. She turned back, but the path was even more treacherous now, the thorns reaching higher, moving like living creatures. The venom pulsed in her veins, making her limbs feel heavy. Sluggish. But she would not fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. Step by step, she forced her body forward, ignoring the agony lacing through her nerves. Every movement sent new blades of pain cutting through her flesh, but she refused to yield. A final step. Then another. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the courtyard erupted in a gasp. She had done it. She had won the first trial. Moira's knees buckled, but before she could fall, Ciaran was there. He caught her, his grip firm, his warmth anchoring her to reality. "You're bleeding," he murmured, his voice laced with barely restrained rage. She let out a breathless laugh. "I noticed." His fingers brushed her wrist, his magic pulsing just beneath his skin. They wanted you to fail. She looked up at him, her storm-gray eyes clear and unwavering. Then they'll be disappointed. A slow smile ghosted across Ciaran's lips. Pride. Relief. Fury. Lysara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Impressive, she mused, though there was a flicker of irritation beneath her words. But the trial is far from over. Moira exhaled, rolling her shoulders despite the pain. Then what's next? Lysara's smile sharpened. Something more challenging. The crowd whispered, anticipation thick in the air. The first trial had been pain. The next would be fear. And Moira was ready. Chapter 16, The Trial of Fear. The courtyard had barely settled from the first trial when the second was announced. The Trial of Fear. Lysara's smirk had only widened as she stepped forward, her sharp gaze sweeping over Moira. You endured pain well enough, she said, her voice laced with mock admiration. But pain is simple. Fear is something else entirely. The murmurs in the crowd grew. The Unseelie nobles thrived on spectacle and suffering, and they had been waiting for this moment. Moira met Lysara's gaze, her body aching, but her will unshaken. I'm not afraid of you. Lysara tilted her head, amusement flickering in her dark eyes. No? Then let us see what lurks in the shadows of your own mind. The priest of the old magic stepped forward once more, holding a small, ornate veil filled with black, swirling mist. The very sight of it sent a chill crawling down Moira's spine. The elixir of nightmares, the priest intoned, holding the vial high. A potion crafted from the essence of the veil itself. When consumed, it forces the drinker to face their deepest fears. Moira's breath hitched. Nightmares made real. She clenched her fists. She could do this. The priest approached her, holding out the vial. Drink. Ciaran shifted beside her, tension radiating from him. His golden eyes burned with silent fury. This is unnecessary. Lysara laughed lightly. Oh, but it is, my king. A ruler must be strong, not only in body but in mind. What kind of queen would she be if she cannot even face her own fears? Ciaran's fists clenched, but Moira reached out and took the vial before he could stop her. She would not show weakness. Not here. Not in front of them. She lifted the vial to her lips and drank. The world tilted. Moira's vision blurred, the courtyard vanishing into shadow. Her pulse pounded in her ears as a deep, guttural whisper slithered through her mind. You do not belong. Her breath came in short gasps. The darkness thickened, twisting, taking shape. A great hall rose around her, towering and endless. At its center sat a throne of blackened bone, draped in shadow. And there, Ciaran. But his golden eyes were cold, his expression carved from ice. Her heart stuttered. Ciaran? He did not respond. He only stared, his lips curling into something cruel. You are nothing to me. Moira flinched as his voice cut through her like a blade. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's not true. But the shadows around her shifted, revealing figures in the dark, Unseelie nobles with hollow eyes, whispering, laughing. She was never meant to rule. She was a weakness. She was a mistake. Moira clutched her head. The voices burrowed deeper, clawing at her resolve. She was a mistake. Her breath came faster. This isn't real. It was a trick, a fabrication of her own mind. But the illusion wasn't done with her yet. The throne room melted away, replaced by a battlefield bathed in blood. Moira's heart seized. She knew this place. It was a memory. Bodies lay strewn across the cold earth. Fae warriors, slain. The scent of iron filled the air. And standing amid the carnage, Ciaran, his sword dripping with blood. And at his feet, Moira. Her own lifeless body lay before him, her storm-gray eyes staring unseeing at the sky. A sob wrenched from her throat. No. No, this never happened. Ciaran's voice echoed, hollow and empty. It will. Moira screamed as the vision shattered. She came back gasping, shaking, her knees hitting the stone floor of the courtyard. The crowd had gone silent. Her skin was slick with sweat, her body trembling violently. Her breath hitched as she looked up, vision still swimming with the ghosts of what she had seen. Ciaran was already at her side, his hands gripping her arms, his voice low and frantic. Moira. Look at me. She did. And she saw only warmth in his golden eyes. You're here, she choked out, voice barely a whisper. You didn't. His brows drew together. What did they show you? Her fingers dug into his arms. That you, she couldn't say it. Couldn't repeat the lie. Ciaran cupped her face, his touch grounding. Whatever you saw, it was not real. His voice was fierce, unyielding. Do you hear me? It was not real. A shudder ran through her. But what if it was? What if it could be? She swallowed, her throat raw. But she nodded. Ciaran pulled her against him, wrapping her in his arms as if shielding her from the very shadows that had tried to consume her. She melted into his warmth, desperate to hold on to something real. Lysara's voice rang out, her amusement barely concealed. Well, she survived. Ciaran's grip on Moira tightened. Moira forced herself to straighten, steeling her spine against the terror still lingering in her veins. She had endured the pain. She had endured the fear. And she was still standing. Lysara's smirk faltered just slightly as Moira lifted her chin and met her gaze head-on. What's next? She asked. The court erupted. Moira had conquered the second trial. But the final test awaited. And it would be the hardest of all. Chapter 17, The Final Trial. The murmurs of the Unseelie Court settled into a tense silence. The last trial loomed before Moira, its outcome deciding her fate. She had endured pain. She had faced her greatest fears. Now, she would be tested in the one thing that mattered most, power. Lysara stepped forward, her expression veiled in amusement. You have proven that you can endure, she said smoothly. But pain and fear mean nothing without strength. A flick of her wrist, and the shadows of the court twisted and coiled, parting to reveal an arena of blackened stone at the center of the grand hall. Sigils burned along its edges, humming with dark magic. The trial of Dominion, Lysara announced, her voice laced with quiet cruelty. A battle, not just of skill, but of will. If she is to reclaim her throne, she must prove she is worthy of it. Moira's pulse thrummed. She had felt her magic stir the moment she crossed the veil. But to control it, to wield it as a queen should, was something else entirely. Ciaran's hand found her wrist. His grip was firm, grounding. You don't have to do this. His voice was low, tense, but beneath it, there was fear for her. She turned to him, meeting his golden eyes that had once been her home. I do. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. She had made her choice. Lysara's lips curled into a smile. Then let the trial begin. The torches dimmed. The sigils ignited. The air grew heavy with magic. From the far end of the arena, a challenger emerged, a figure clad in dark, flowing armor, his face hidden behind a mask of silver. A warrior of the Unseelie Court. Moira inhaled sharply. They expect me to fight him? A voice echoed through the hall. The battle is to submission. Only one may stand victorious. Moira clenched her fists. Magic stirred inside her, flickering, uncertain, but there. She had no weapons, no armor, but she had power. Her opponent moved first, a blur of shadows and steel. He was fast, his magic ancient and honed over centuries. A blade forged in darkness lashed toward her. Moira barely dodged, rolling to the side, her heart pounding. Think. Use your magic. The warrior struck again, forcing her back. The crowd watched in silent anticipation. Then, something inside her snapped. She raised her hands, and the magic buried in her bones answered. Dark tendrils of power uncoiled from her fingertips, twisting toward her opponent. The shadows obeyed her. The warrior faltered for a fraction of a second, and Moira took advantage. She willed the shadows forward, forcing them to coil around his wrists, his ankles, pulling him down. The weight of her magic pressed against him, binding him. The court gasped. Lysara's smirk faltered. Moira felt the power pulse through her, a force both foreign and familiar. She was stronger than they expected. Her opponent fought, struggled, his magic battling hers. But Moira did not yield. She would not lose. She thrust her hand forward, and the force of her magic sent the warrior crashing to his knees. His sword clattered against the stone floor, his breathing ragged. Defeated. Silence descended over the court. Then, the priest of the old magic stepped forward. The battle is over. He turned to Moira. You are victorious. The weight of the moment pressed into her. She had won. She had done what they believed was impossible. She turned toward the nobles, toward Lysara, who now looked less certain, less smug. Ciaran moved to her side. His golden eyes burned with pride. The priest spoke again, his voice solemn. She has passed the trials of the Unseelie. By right, she may reclaim her throne. A murmur rippled through the court, shifting from doubt to acceptance. Moira lifted her chin. She was no longer just a lost soul, no longer a forgotten exile. She was Moira, queen of the Unseelie. And no one would take that from her again. Chapter 18, The Queen's Coronation. The great hall of Ravenglen Keep was draped in twilight and shadows, the black marble columns flickering with ghostly blue fire as the Unseelie Court gathered. Tonight was not a night for whispers or hidden betrayals, tonight, a queen would rise. Moira stood at the center of it all, her storm-gray eyes scanning the nobles before her. Just days ago, they had doubted her, whispered of her exile, wagered on her failure. Now, they knelt. She had won the trials. She had proven her worth. Ciaran stood at her side, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of pride and fierce protectiveness. This was her moment, but she felt the weight of his silent vow, he would never let her be taken from him again. The high priest of the Unseelie, draped in robes of night-woven silk, stepped forward, holding an ancient crown of woven obsidian and shadowstone. Its dark surface shimmered with a magic as old as the court itself. The lost queen has returned, the priest intoned. His voice echoed, filling every darkened corner of the grand chamber. The veil could not hold her. The past could not break her. The trials have forged her anew. Moira inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had come so far. She had reclaimed what was stolen. By the rights of the Unseelie Court, the priest continued, lifting the crown, we name her Moira, Queen of the Shadowed Vale. Ruler of the Unseelie. Keeper of the Night. A hush fell over the hall as he placed the crown upon her head. The moment the cold metal touched her skin, something inside her stirred. Power, raw and ancient, rushed through her veins. This magic was hers. This kingdom was hers. and she would defend it with her very life. The silence broke as the nobles bowed, accepting their new queen. All but one. Lysara stood at the edge of the hall, her lips curling in barely concealed disdain. Her eyes burned with something dangerous, something restless. Defeat did not sit well with her. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her voice as smooth as silk. A fitting coronation, to be sure, she mused. And yet, it is a fragile thing, power, so easily taken, so easily lost. Ciaran stiffened beside Moira, sensing the same threat she did. Lysara was not finished. Moira lifted her chin. "If you wish to challenge my claim, then do it openly," she said coolly. "Or shall you hide in the shadows like a viper, waiting to strike?" Lysara's smirk faltered, but only slightly. "Oh, my queen," she murmured, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You misunderstand me." She lifted her hand. A pulse of dark magic rippled through the air. The torches flickered violently. The ground shuddered beneath them. And from the depths of the hall, something moved. The doors of the grand hall burst open, revealing a cloaked figure. The air around them was thick with unnatural cold, and as they stepped forward, their hood fell away, revealing a face Moira had never seen, but somehow, deep in her soul, she knew. A voice, dark as the abyss, rang through the chamber. "The veil is weak. The old magics stir." Moira's breath hitched. This was not over. Lysara smiled, stepping aside. "Shall we see what kind of queen you truly are?" Ciaran moved instantly, his magic lashing outward, shadows twisting around him like a raging storm. Moira stepped forward, the weight of the crown never feeling heavier than in this moment. She had fought to reclaim her throne. Now, she would fight to keep it. And this battle would be the beginning of something far darker. Epilogue, a veil between worlds. The night had deepened, draping the Unseelie Court in an eerie hush. The air was thick with the scent of burning sage and damp earth, the remnants of battle clinging to the great hall like ghosts that refused to depart. Moira stood at the highest balcony of Ravenglen Keep, the weight of her new crown pressing against her brow. Below, the city pulsed with newfound reverence and quiet fear. Their queen had returned, but with her had come something else. A fracture in the veil. The old magics had begun to stir, and she could feel them as surely as she felt the beat of her own heart. It was not over. Footsteps sounded behind her, soft but deliberate. She didn't turn, she knew who it was. Ciaran stepped beside her, his golden eyes scanning the horizon where the veil shimmered like a wound in the sky. Darkness swirled at the edges, pulsing, waiting. "You should rest," he murmured, though they both knew rest would never come easy for either of them again. Moira let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening on the stone railing. "I can feel it calling to me." He nodded. "The balance has been disturbed. Something is coming." She turned to face him then, the wind tugging at the loose strands of her midnight dark hair, her storm-gray eyes unreadable. "Do you think this was always meant to happen?" Ciaran exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Fate is cruel, but it does not act without purpose." He lifted his hand and, without hesitation, brushed his fingers against her cheek. The warmth of his touch grounded her, tethered her to something real amidst the storm brewing inside her. "You are not alone in this," he murmured, a vow, a promise. She leaned into his touch, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the warmth she had once lost. Then, she pulled back, steeling herself. A queen did not waver. Beyond the courtyard, Lysara's absence was noticed but not mourned. The treacherous noble had disappeared into the night after the battle, leaving only echoes of her final words behind. Power is easily taken, easily lost. Moira did not fear her. She feared what Lysara might have awakened. Tomorrow, We begin preparing the kingdom, Moira said, her voice firm. The veil is weakening. Whatever is on the other side, it's waiting. Ciaran studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. Then, he dipped his head, his expression unreadable. Then we prepare for war. Moira turned back to the dark horizon, where the sky rippled like a living thing, waiting. She had reclaimed her throne. But her true battle had only just begun. And the shadows were waiting to claim her once more.
Every story has an ending, but some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.